Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you all for joining us for this webinar on an exciting green home loan initiative by Irish credit unions. Greenify, which was launched almost exactly a year ago, is a loan product to help make homes more energy efficient and, in turn, more comfortable. A lot has changed since Greenify was launched. Now, more than ever, we're focused on rising energy costs and doing whatever we can to lower our bills. And Greenify could be an important tool in helping us do just that. Over the next hour or so, you'll be hearing more about this loan product. You'll be hearing about the big and small steps we can take to make our homes more energy efficient. And we'll be looking at what Ireland is doing to address the climate crisis. I'd like to ask everybody watching to take part in the discussion. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a Q&A button, and towards the end of this webinar, we will be having a panel discussion. We'd like to ask you to ask us some questions. So if you have anything you'd like to put to any of our panel of experts, type the question in there and we'll do our best to get through as many of them as possible. But first, to open proceedings, I'd like to invite Therese Conway, CEO of Cavan Credit Union, to say a few words.
Thanks, Helen. Good morning, everyone. My name is Therese Conway and I am CEO of Cavan Union. It is my great privilege to represent the other Greenify credit unions on the call this morning, and I'm delighted we have so many attendees. We're up on nearly 100 now, joining us this morning for our Greenify webinar. I would like to welcome you all and our speakers to today's session. For those of you who don't know me or Cavan Credit Union, we joined the Greenify Loan Initiative earlier this year, and we are one of 14 credit unions currently offering Greenify loans to our members. To us at Cavan Credit Union, and I know this is a shared view with the other credit unions involved, being part of Greenify is much more than just offering a green loan to our members. While Greenify is first and foremost a loan product for the energy upgrade of your home, it is also a crucial part of how we, as credit unions, can play our part in addressing what is arguably the greatest challenge and crisis of the 21st century, climate change. As community-based financial institutions with a high trust value, demonstrated again last week with our topping the customer service poll for a record 8 years running, credit unions are perfectly positioned to be a central part of Ireland's response. And Greenify represents the opportunity for credit unions to lead on the ethical, practical, and time-bound response that the country now needs. This is about much more than a loan product, but about doing business in and supporting our communities to live in a socially and environmentally responsible way. Greenify is the means by which we can future-proof our credit unions and the communities throughout Ireland that rely on them. The participating credit unions in Greenify acknowledge that we were only at the beginning of the collective journey. However, we see a long-term and successful future for Greenify. And to this end, we are delighted that our webinar coincides with the imminent release of the Greenify Guide. This guide provides practical steps for Irish homeowners and looks at case studies from our Greenify homeowners to highlight the process of delivering home energy upgrades. And we hope this will be a useful guide and demonstrate how credit unions can help them on their journey to a more energy efficient home. For our webinar this morning, we are delighted to have an opening address from Brian Corr, Head of Credit Union Policy at the Department of Finance. We also hope to be joined, I know she's having some technical issues joining, Marie Donnelly, Chair of the Climate Change Advisory Council of Ireland, who will give our keynote address on Ireland Inc. and climate change. And having worked closely with Colm Tynan, Programme Leader in Sustainable Energy Engineering with South East Technological University, as part of the education journey for our credit union team members, we are also very pleased to have Colm join us to review the 3 levels of home energy upgrades. I will now hand back to Helen, and we are delighted to have her as our moderator today for what we will hope will be an informative and lively session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Therese. Our next speaker now is Brian Corr, Head of Credit Union Policy with the Department of Finance.
Thanks very much, Helen and Therese. It's my pleasure to join you for the Greenify webinar marking 12 months since the launch of your product. Minister Fleming sends his apologies. Green loans provide play a crucial role in enabling people to retrofit their homes, and that enables sustainability and increases sustainability for us all. I'd like to commend everyone involved in Greenify for playing your part in helping Ireland achieve its climate action goals. The webinar comes at a very important time. It will be outlined to you later, but humankind is faced with our biggest challenge yet, which is turned the tide on climate change. In recent weeks, reports have warned of the increase in frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as heat waves and floods, and we've seen many recent examples, including in Pakistan and Florida. Closer to home, we've the challenge of reducing emissions and meeting retrofit targets by 2030. Sustainable finance will play a crucial role in government's plan to transition our society and economy to a more sustainable path. The government's climate action plan sets a target of upgrading 500,000 homes to a building energy rating of B2 by 2030 and installing 400,000 heat pumps to replace older, less efficient heating systems. These targets were confirmed in the programme for government and represent a very significant increase both in the volume and the depth of retrofit activity in Ireland. And I suppose what government is saying is that we must meet these targets. In the recent budget, it was announced that 337 million will go towards grants for energy efficiency. This is the highest funding ever committed to energy efficiency. Through the Warmer Home Scheme, this funding will provide energy upgrades for 37,000 households, including many in or at risk of energy poverty. These measures will deliver healthier and more comfortable homes with lower energy bills at a crucial time. The cost of living crisis has highlighted the need for reducing and managing those energy bills. They'll also reduce emissions for the residential sector and improve air quality. The National Development Plan also provides an unprecedented level of investment for retrofit activity over the coming years, with planned allocations up to and including 2025 of 1.43 billion. While this will be significant in supporting our retrofitting targets, exchequer investment alone will not be sufficient to fund the scale of retrofit and heat pump installation required. Additional private capital and new funding models will be needed to bridge this financing gap. To that end, government is working with the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland and the European Investment Bank to develop a retrofit guarantee scheme and the associated low-cost residential retrofit loan. This project forms part of Ireland's National Recovery and Resilience Plan. This part exchequer, part EU funded scheme will enable credit institutions to offer loans at reduced interest rates, making energy upgrades more affordable. Both ministers, Minister Donoghue and Minister Fleming, would like to take the opportunity to highlight the work of Greenify and the wider credit union sector in making green lending accessible and affordable for your communities and for all households all over Ireland. Credit unions' role as providers of unsecured credit makes them a natural partner of the governments to support the climate change agenda. As well as providing affordable finance for retrofitting homes, credit unions are also helping their communities improve energy efficiency and reduce carbon emissions. A few weeks ago, Minister Fleming met with Nave Brendon Credit Union in Loughrea, which worked with the Sustainable Energy Association of Ireland to support the setup of what's called Sustainable Energy West in 2018. Since then, Sustainable Energy West has carried out significant efforts to improve energy efficiency and reduce carbon emissions, including the production of an energy master plan for its catchment area. We've been excited to see Greenify and the wider credit union sector collaborating to support the government's retrofitting objectives. It's very encouraging to see the effort being made by the sector to adapt and develop its products and offerings to members. Green lending products not only play an important role in climate action, they also provide credit unions with an opportunity to grow their lending in a realistic and sustainable way. In addition to personal lending for retrofit, credit unions should also explore the potential for lending to SMEs to support their needs. SBCI, the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, is currently working on a loan guarantee scheme to support SMEs in climate transition, which may be of interest to credit unions in future years. In addition, credit unions could consider or should consider how they could assist in reducing some of the barriers for retrofit, including the lack of skilled labour, possibly through supporting local community apprenticeships and other community supports. While we are encouraged and the ministers are encouraged by the work of the credit union sector, We would also sound a note of caution. The sector in Ireland is very fragmented and products and offerings differ from town to town. This makes it difficult for credit union products to gain nationwide coverage or to take advantage of economies of scale. And collaboration is necessary for the growth of the sector, something Minister Fleming says when he presents to the sector. Even the largest credit unions don't have the size and scale to develop opportunities fully on their own. In their roles, Minister Donoghue and Fleming have been committed to helping the movement deliver community banking throughout the country. The programme for government commitment to review the policy framework for credit unions is now complete. We recently received approval from Cabinet and work has commenced on drafting the legislation. I'm pleased to say that the Credit Union Amendment Bill 2022 has received priority status for publication in the Dáil's autumn session, and I look forward to working with you as this legislation progresses through the Oireachtas. The proposals contained in the bill address 5 key objectives. The first is to recognise the role of credit unions. The second objective is to support investment in collaboration, which I've touched on already. In our engagements over the past year, we have seen evidence of collaborations underway. More than 75 credit unions have been approved by the Central Bank to provide current accounts. More than 47 are providing agri-lending through Cultivate. 22 credit unions are providing loan products guaranteed by the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland. Specifically in relation to the provision of current accounts, I'd like to highlight the great efforts made by you and other credit unions to fill the gap left by the impending exit of Ulster Bank and KBC. Credit union current accounts now make up more than 10% of all new current account openings, proving that the hard work has paid off, something which you in developing Greenify will be well aware of. The third objective is to support governance. The review puts forward proposals that will allow the boards of directors more time to focus on strategic development and risk management as against administrative tasks. The fourth objective is to improve member services. The review takes account of the need and desire to keep improving services to members. Members should have access to the widest range of services available, and they should be able to access these services no matter which credit union they are a member of. Those who have met us over the past 18 months know that the ministers have carefully considered the value of the common bond to your members. They would not like to see the common bond being a barrier to members accessing badly needed financial services. The legislative proposals consist of practical improvements to the common bond, which will assist credit unions in providing more products to more members while protecting the essence of the common bond. These proposals should help credit unions improve their competitiveness. The fifth objective is the transparency of regulatory engagement. There's a need for better coordination within the credit union sector and between the credit union sector and the central bank, and also with other state bodies, including SEEI and SPCI, etc. The review will seek to include proposals to support regulatory engagement and improve regulatory engagement, whilst respecting the need for regulatory independence. In conclusion, the ministers would like to highlight again the important role that Greenify and the wider credit union sector can play in providing green lending to your members and in helping the government in its response to climate change. This role is more important now than ever before, given the urgency of tackling climate change. Green lending also offers you and others across the credit union sector the opportunity to grow lending and increase collaboration. Both of these elements are essential to the sustainable growth of the sector. Thank you very much for your time and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today.
Great, thank you very much, Brian. Now we have, I'm not sure if we have Mary Donnelly here for our keynote address. Are you here, Mary? Can you hear me?
Helen, can you hear me?
I can.
Hello?
I can, Mary. We can hear you, we can't see you, but I'm going to hand over to you now, Mary, for the keynote address. So it's Mary Donnelly, Chair of the Climate Change Advisory Council.
Thank you very much indeed, Helen. And my apologies, my information system isn't working full flight today. So I'm coming through to you by phone, but I don't have a video possibility with this particular system. So my apologies for that. I'm very pleased to have a conversation with you today because this whole area of climate change and climate change action is so dependent on participation and involvement of people in society in Ireland. In the end of the day, if the actions that we are talking about in terms of climate change don't improve people's lives, then you would have to legitimately ask, why would they bother? But in the area of our homes and our buildings, be it for small offices or our homes at home, the whole concept of making our buildings more secure, more comfortable, less drafty, warmer in the winter, and more comfortable to live in makes absolute sense. And in this context, that kind of common sense works both for the individual, for the community, and indeed for climate action. So the area of looking at our housing stock, improving our housing stock, and making it work better for us is very much to the fore in the Council's minds in terms of the recommendations that we make to government. And in that context, I think we must firstly situate ourselves as to where we are right now. We're in a very difficult position. It's going to be a very difficult winter. We are being confronted with the war in the Ukraine and the consequences of that war and the use of energy as a weapon in that war. It takes us back to the early 70s when we had the oil crisis, for those who are old enough to remember that. But in fact, we're in a much worse situation because this is a very deliberate strategy to try and deprive Europe of essential energy needed both for our society and indeed also our economy. And it means that we have to box very cleverly in the immediate term and indeed into the medium and longer term. And in the immediate term, the Council is very strongly of the view that immediate low-hanging fruit in terms of retrofit of our buildings should be a priority, that we need to move very fast now to the effective and low-cost options that exist for everybody in society. And we've cited a few examples of this. For example, insulation in the attic. There is an SEAI grant for that. The materials are available from the local hardware store. The investment is not a huge investment, but the return in terms of comfort in the house is truly enormous. Of course, there are other issues that people can use funding for in terms of, for example, temperature controls in the house, draft excluders, looking at timing and other appliances that can be used to save energy, which in the end of the day, in this winter is very important because energy is costing us a lot of money, and the more efficiently we can use energy, the more effective it is for our pocket. So in that context, we do encourage what's called a shallow retrofit. Of course, the ideal would be to go for a deep retrofit, but the shallow retrofit, sometimes it's the more practical and pragmatic approach that people can take. And we would encourage everybody to look right now, what's their situation with regard to insulation in the house, what's their situation with regard to draft exclusion, and what's their situation with regard to temperature controls. And these are issues that will require a small amount of funding, not the retrofit of 50 or 60,000, but maybe a couple of thousand. And I think your own Greenify initiative there and your own service that you offer to the community fits very well with the rollout of these immediate actions. Of course, we have also to think that this is a crisis that we have this winter. It's probably going to last for a number of winters. So it's not just now that we need to take action, or for now that we need to take action, but we need to take action now for the medium and the longer term. And that's why in the Council's recommendation in the annual review this year, we have specifically identified the necessity for an increased rate of rollout of the financial supports, an increased rate of rollout of the new technologies such as, for example, heat pumps. We're very strongly of the view that the government should come out with very clear plans and maps for the installation of district heating systems in urban spaces. The most recent study from SEAI has shown that we could heat almost 50% of our buildings by using excess heat from industrial and other sources using district heating systems as a distributor. So there are a number of areas there that we now need to move forward on in order to get the benefit into the medium and then ultimately into the longer term. And Part of the challenge that we have here, of course, is that, and indeed in conversations, that many people have said to me, well, you know, I want to do something, but I'm not too sure what it is I can do. And I think in that context, the suggestion of having a kind of a guideline or a framework as a conversation starter and as a pathway that you can debate with people and explain to them, these are the steps that you can take. Great if you can take them all at one go, but equally, some of these steps can be taken this year and perhaps other steps taken next year, depending on availability of both the capacity of the individual and also their funding. So the idea of having this kind of structured approach to the dialogue is an extremely good one, and certainly very useful in terms of supporting people to make the decision to start to do something that's going to make their own life and their own comfort better. There is also another area that's very important, and this is an issue that really needs to be operated at a local level, and that is, you know, community-based support and community-based activities. Sometimes people are hesitant to make a decision because they haven't seen how it works. Does it really work? Is it complicated? Can I manage it? And this is where either community investment, say in a community hall or a sports hall or a school, into the newer options in terms of heating, say in terms of heat pump, the insulation, the temperature controls, where everybody could perhaps come and see it and understand how it works, feel it and touch it, as they say, and then be supported in the introduction of these changes into their own properties as well. All of these are the kinds of urgent measures that we really need to communicate to people, present the options to them, and then support them in their choices as to what initiatives they can take that can make their own living more comfortable and certainly warmer and healthier going forward. The whole question of where we are in climate action is one that really needs to be addressed from the starting point of where is the biggest impact in terms of climate damage coming from. And of course, it comes from our use of fossil fuels. So the message out of this really is that we need to reduce our dependence and indeed ultimately eliminate our dependence on imported fossil fuels. And Ireland is hugely dependent on imported fossil fuels. Virtually all of the oil, kerosene that we use for heating comes as an imported fossil fuel, and the vast majority of our gas, that's used sometimes for heating, sometimes for electricity, also comes from imported pipelines. So our dependence on external sources of energy is very, very high in Ireland. But we are fortunate in that we do have the opportunity and we do have the natural resources that allows us to move away from this import dependency, which of course brings with it not just variable prices at a very high level, but also instability in terms of security of supply. So much better if we use our own natural resources of wind and solar and bioenergy to become much more self-sufficient on our own natural resources for the energy and the services that we get from energy. And in that context, the Council has been urging that we increase our ambition substantially in this space, that we look to increasing the rollout of solar panels, for example, on every south-facing roof that we have in the country, be it your domestic home, be it your local office or supermarket or sports centre, as the case may be. Solar panels can be placed on any south-facing roof and will deliver electricity for consumption on-site or selling back to the grid. And of course, now we have the possibility to be paid for the energy, the electricity that you sell back to the grid. So the rollout of solar panels is one very real measure that can be taken, a little bit more expensive than the earlier retrofit measures that I was talking about, but the payback period, which would have been something like 7 to 9 years before these prices came about, now falls anywhere between about 3.5 and 6 years. So it becomes very interesting as an investment opportunity to produce your own electricity, to use it yourself, and what you don't use, you sell to the grid. And the payback, as I say, period has really fallen quite dramatically. The second area that we're very keen to see rolled out is a greater level of ambition for onshore wind power in Ireland. It's a technology that's well established. We know how to do it. It's available and we can roll it out quickly. It's also cheaper than offshore wind and therefore gives a better value to the Irish consumer. Of course, that's not to say that we shouldn't do offshore wind as well. That is something that we do need to progress. We do need to continue with it. We do need to speed up the processes there. It will bring large quantities of electricity when it comes on stream, but it will of course be closer to the end of the decade before these really start to deliver benefit into society. So the shorter term measures are to roll out the possibilities in terms of solar panels and also onshore wind, that we can use our own resources to produce the power for ourselves, for heating our homes, for transport, for those who have electric transport, and of course for electricity to avoid blackouts. So there are a number of areas that we're very focused on in the immediate term, in terms of trying to ensure that this winter is not as damaging to our society as it could be if we haven't got these measures, that people will be supported throughout this winter period as the temperatures drop, as it gets colder, that they will be in a position to have a warm home, to have the option to both heat themselves and feed themselves, because we know that for some people this is going to be a real challenge. And everything that we can do in the interim period, we need to take those measures to roll it out. I do believe that the credit unions, you have an extraordinary footprint in Ireland. You are present in local communities. You are down the street, as they say, from local communities. You're a familiar face, and you're a friendly, welcoming door. In that context, you have huge influence in supporting people in terms of making these initiatives, taking these initiatives and making these investments in order to improve their own situation at home. This for us is a priority in the building area. We have, of course, other areas that we're talking to government about, including transport and agriculture. And the building space is a particularly important one. In terms of agriculture, we have to remember that a lot of the rural part of Ireland is distant from urban spaces, towns and villages, as the case may be. And in farming conditions, the rollout of solar panels on farm buildings really is an opportunity, not just for the farm enterprise itself, but for the farmhouse and household. So again, this leads to the point that I was making earlier on. Short-term, low-hanging fruit, we need to move forward. We need to move forward now. We need to get the benefit now from these opportunities and take it on board. One of the areas that the Council is particularly concerned about is the speed at which the policies that have been decided are actually being rolled out. We are concerned that there is some very good plans in place, and indeed we're now looking forward to a new climate action plan coming out probably next month. Very good ideas, very good policy initiatives there. The real challenge that we have is to implement those policies, to go from planning to action and implementation, to roll them out, and that means at a local level making the difference to people's lives in terms of all of the services that we get from energy. And that's, the power, the electricity to turn on our appliances, the heating system, however it might be operating, for example, through heat pumps, and of course transport, which progressively is moving into the electricity space as well. So all of these areas are priority issues that we need to look at. We need to ensure that they are rolled out now, that we move from planning into action, and that we get on with the job. So I must apologise that what I might have shown you today in terms of some slide, of course I can't do. But I wanted to just highlight today some of the key issues and key messages that we have taken out of the annual review. So just to summarize, what we're looking at here is immediate action. Low-hanging fruit, let's move now, let's get the job done. In order to support people to do that, yes, we do support a kind of a structured approach to the dialogue, to the conversation with people in the form of guideline or other documents such as that, because it allows people to take a measured and step-by-step approach to the investments that they might make. And thirdly, of course, we do strongly support the community approach and community support element of all of the measures that are necessary in this context. And indeed, in other areas as well, because the community, in the end of the day, is what will bring us forward. So thank you very much for your time. And again, I apologize for the technological failure today in terms of not being able to reach you by video. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Mary. Your message was loud and clear, so I don't think we missed any slides or anything like that. As I said, your message came across very clear. You're going to stay with us, Mary. We're going to have a panel discussion in a little while, but first, for a short presentation on home energy upgrades and the different levels of spending required for these upgrades, I'm going to introduce you to Colm Tynan. Colm is Programme Leader of the Sustainable Energy Engineering and Fire Engineering courses in South East Technological University.
Hey everyone, if you just give me 1 minute, sorry, I need to share my screen. Apologies for the delay. Why isn't this working? So I'm not sure, can you see that presentation?
We can, yeah, we can see that, Colm.
Do you see the proper presentation or the one with the next slide on it as well?
We can see the one with the next slide on it as well, but that's fine. If you're happy with that, we can.
I don't know why that's...
The gremlins are out in force this morning, Colm.
Yeah. Okay, apologies. Yeah, so I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak to you all today. And as we say, it's time to greenify. And I think all the speakers before me have really highlighted that and emphasized that now is the time to take action. Maybe we've been sitting on the fence for too long, and possibly the need to move, we've delayed because energy was too cheap, but now energy is not cheap, and possibly that will force people maybe to start taking a little bit more action. So a little bit about myself, just to start. My name is Colm Tynan. Unfortunately, I've been working for 25 years now, so I'm starting to get a little bit old. But when I would have started, I mean, I started out designing heating and ventilation systems in buildings, and we never really worried about that they consume much energy, only that they were functional. But then I got into lecturing in energy engineering and SETU down in Waterford. And as time moved along, we started specializing in looking at low energy building design and how we can design our buildings to consume less and less energy. And then obviously that's fine for new buildings, but our majority of our building stock, over 90% of it, is old buildings, and we need to retrofit those. And as was mentioned there earlier by Brian, that the ambition is that we would upgrade 500,000 of those houses by 2030. So we have a lot of work to do. If you break those numbers down, it's over 60,000 a year between now and 2030. I think that the report in the newspaper today, was it in the Irish Examiner, says that we've got off to a very slow start. So we need to actually pick up the pace on that. So I lecture in retrofitting as well, and in building services systems. And I've developed with the credit union team a bespoke training program for the credit union loan officers, and I also developed one with Engineers Ireland for professionals as well. So engineering professionals in retrofitting of buildings. And I'm also working with the credit union team at the moment to develop the Greenify guide, which we hope to launch now in the next couple of weeks. So just to talk about some steps that we might be able to take. So starting first, maybe the SEAI, or the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, they kind of have a 4-step plan that people should kind of instigate. So rather than jumping in at the deep end and saying, oh yeah, I'm going to put in a heat pump, they kind of say, well, hold the horses. Let's start with trying to assess where you actually are at the moment. So instead of racing off and maybe spending money and spending it maybe on the wrong product or the wrong intervention, well, you should really start with getting your building assessed. And the first stage of that is to get a BER assessment done. So that tells you kind of your current state of play of where you are. And with that comes an advisory report. And the advisory report will tell you what you need to do, what aspects of your building need to be improved to get you up to a BER B2 standard. Now, it doesn't tell you how you can go about doing those, but it tells you that maybe you need to improve your walls and your windows and your heating system and so on. So it gives you an outline of what needs to be done. I suppose to get better advice then, I would be always recommending is that you would then go and engage an energy consultant who would do a technical evaluation for you and tell you exactly what you need to do to your walls or to your heating system, and how much it might be going to cost, how much energy you're going to save on each intervention. So that's kind of the assessment stage. After that, the SEAI and anyone else who deals with retrofitting will always tell you that you must take a fabric first approach. So in other words, we must look at the building envelope, and we need to improve the insulation properties of the external walls and the roof and possibly the ground floor and the windows, and we need to eliminate the drafts. And the last one there possibly is people don't realize how much energy or heat is lost from the building through the drafts, but it can be very, very significant. So, and some of these interventions are expensive and some of them are not. And only after we have all of those fabric first approaches done should we really be moving on to number 3. And then we look at our heating system. So a lot of our heating systems will be very poorly controlled, or I often ask students to do a little survey at their house, and a lot of them will come back and saying that they only have an on-off switch. So they've effectively no control on their heating, only they can switch it on or switch it off. So getting a system zoned where you put thermostats on for different parts of the house and having time control, that allows us then to turn on and off the heating at different times and to set different temperatures in different parts of our houses. So we can keep our bedrooms maybe at a slightly lower temperature than our living areas. And the SAI approach then that'll be the first 3 interventions. And really that's when we would really, really notice the effects of comfort in our house in terms of our improved comfort and making our house a much more comfortable place to live, I suppose, a place we want to spend more time, making all the rooms in the house more accessible, because lots of people have a house and maybe there's a cold room or 2 cold rooms that they just store stuff in and they don't utilize the rooms because maybe it's facing north and it's poorly insulated or heating system doesn't work properly. So it really opens up our whole house to being used and allows comfort for everyone all the time. And then I suppose the last thing is that the last step in any upgrade is to look at your renewable or low energy technologies. And these only come at the end. Okay, so you're talking about, if we want to reduce our carbon footprint, we're going to move away from fossil fuel based heating systems. So after a fabric upgrade, that's when we look at maybe putting in our heat pump. And yes, heat pumps run on electricity, and some of our electricity comes from fossil fuels at the moment. But as we move towards 80% of our electricity on the national grid coming from renewable sources by 2030, we'll be confident that almost all the heat energy that we would be taking out of a heat pump would be coming from renewable electricity source. Obviously, already people have mentioned about solar PV systems, and they're now very, very popular and very cost effective. Another thing, sometimes if we make our buildings very airtight, so if we cut out all the drafts, we possibly have to look at putting in a mechanical ventilation system. But if we can implement a heat recovery ventilation system where we can recover all the heat energy that's leaving in the exhaust air to reheat the air coming in, but then we can save quite a bit of energy there. So that's just the SEAI approach on how we actually implement our upgrades. I suppose what I wanted to just look at, and we're working on this within the Greenify guide, is looking at different levels of energy upgrades and kind of the small wins where you don't really need to invest anything or very little. And this is kind of our level one that possibly everyone could do and not have to spend for any one of these interventions, spend any more than €100. So simple things, you know, that can allow us to save money. And I suppose it is the responsibility of every homeowner to try and reduce their energy consumption, and particularly now with electricity and gas bills and oil bills increasing month on month. So I just picked out 4 simple things that we could all probably do today if we haven't done it already. We could start changing out our light bulbs to LED light bulbs. You can save up to 85% on the energy. Lots of people have hot water cylinders that are not lagged. Putting a simple lagging jacket on it could save you up to €1 a day. And we heat our water every day of the year, so there's €365 of a saving. If you turn down the heating thermostat, so if you do have thermostats, for every 1 degree we reduce that thermostat by, we can save up to about 5% on our energy bill. And the 4th one is, most of us now would have condensing boilers. And I'm not going to go into what condensing boilers are, but the lower that the flow temperature is set on those, the more energy efficient they become. So if we can reduce the flow temperature on our boiler to 60%, or get the next time the guy is out servicing your boiler, ask them to reduce the flow temperature on it, we can increase the boiler efficiency by about 10%. So there are simple things that can be done that save quite a bit of energy and money and reduce our carbon emissions. And we could probably all do those today. The next level up is, you know, I mean, if we want to spend maybe up to €1,000, and they don't all cost €1,000, but get your boiler serviced. So, you know, I mean, think to yourself, when was the last time that I actually had my oil or gas boiler serviced? If it wasn't in the last 12 months, well, possibly now is the time to pick up the phone and ring your service engineer and get them out, because that will increase the efficiency of the boiler by about 10%, regardless of what type of boiler it is. We could look at our radiators. So maybe, again, we don't have any control on them. So if we can fit what they call TRV valves on the radiators, they're thermostatic radiator valves. So that would give you individual room temperature control and allow us then to make each room more comfortable. If you have an open fire, it's time to consider either putting a fire door on the front of it or actually taking out the open fire and putting in a stove. Again, we'll reduce our fuel consumption by up to about 30%. They're much more efficient, so they burn less fuel and more of the heat is given out into the room and less heat goes up the chimney. And insulate your attic. So now we're getting into our thermal insulation, and the first step would be to look at your attic. 25% of the heat that's lost from our houses goes out through the attic and the roof. And it's the cheapest form of insulation, and the grant that's available at SEI practically covers the total cost of putting it in. So it's an absolutely no-brainer. If your attic is not properly insulated, well, now is the time to do it. If you're going to insulate your attic and you're saying, oh, I have insulation in it, to get the best performance, you should have at least 300 millimeters, which is a foot, and the optimum, the recommended, be 400 millimeters of insulation in your attic. So if you get up and you say, oh, there's 100 millimeters or 4 inches in the attic, it's time to add another 8 to 12 inches on top of that. And that'll really cut out almost all of that heat loss through your attic. So there may be the middle expenses up to €1,000 for any one of those interventions. And then if we go beyond that, where we're going to actually invest, the next step then is to look at the walls of your home. We lose about 35% of the heat through the walls of our houses on average. So insulating these is going to dramatically reduce that. And there's, depending on the type of walls you have, there are different interventions. Some people might go for external wall insulation. Some people might pump the cavity of the wall first and do external wall insulation. Some people will do internal dry lining. And that's really where the energy consultant comes in. And for your house or your client's house, they will tell them which option is best for them. If you have an old boiler, and when I say old boiler, boilers that are over 15 years old, tend to be non-condensing or just standard boilers. So they only are about 60 or 70% efficient. So 60% if they haven't been serviced, possibly 70% if they have been serviced. If we replace them with a new condensing boiler, we can increase that efficiency up to 90%. So there's a dramatic increase of 20 to 30% on our efficiency, which means we're going to consume 20% to 30% less energy or oil or gas. And then the heating controls, as we said, upgrade your heating system by putting in maybe separate time and temperature control on the heating for the radiators and the domestic hot water, which is the water that comes out to your tap. So if we can separate those and control them separately, that they can come on at different times and that we can control the temperature in each of them as well. So they're some of the interventions, and I have a few more at the high level, the larger investment ones. So the next thing you might think would be to upgrade your windows. And some people make the mistake that it's the first thing they go for. They say, oh, I have a draft in my window, I'm going to replace them. But windows are really expensive to replace. So unless they're more than 20 years old, you should really think hard about replacing them. If they're drafty, you can get the draft stripping replaced around the open section. If there's a draft under the window board, we can use air tightness seals on it to try and prevent the air getting in or out. So this is one of the more expensive ones. And you can see now I'm coming to looking at the very end, installing your renewable technologies. So solar PV was mentioned before. So this is where you're going to produce up to 70% of your own electricity, typically off a system you put on your house. And if you don't use it, you can sell the excess back to your electricity supplier now, or you can buy a battery and store it for use later on. So a lot of us don't live in our house during the day, we're at work. The sun is out during the day when we produce our electricity. So if we'd like to utilize more of it, well then possibly you can also buy a battery pack that comes with it, and it'll store the excess energy for use later in the evening or during the nighttime. And install a heat pump. So if we've done the thermal upgrades on our house, now is the time then to consider if the house is well insulated, now is the time to consider switching to a heat pump. So don't tell someone to go install a heat pump into an old house that hasn't been thermally upgraded first. They must thermally upgrade it first and then think about putting in a heat pump. It's an expensive investment, but it will move you away from fossil fuels to a renewable electricity heating source, which is going to dramatically reduce your carbon footprint. And I suppose from an environmental point of view, that's where we need to go if we're going to meet our targets of our 2030 and 2050 climate targets. So that's just a little snapshot in terms of, what we're trying to do. The loan officers who've come on the training course, we would have dealt with all those issues along the way, looking at the various thermal upgrades in the building, looking at the heating systems in the building and trying to explain simply how we control them and how they can be improved, looking at the renewable technology options that are there, and trying to give them some examples of how much energy we can save and how much carbon dioxide we can offset as well. So that's my little bit. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. Maybe you come back to us when we're having our little discussion on the panel. Thank you very much, Helen.
Great. That's great. Thanks a million, Colm. And I think it's time for our little discussion on the panel now. And as Colm said, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, just type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and we will do our best to get through as many of them as possible. Therese, I'm going to come to you first. Greenify was launched almost exactly a year ago. What has demand for the product been like over the past year?
I suppose it was mentioned by different members there speaking already. We are at an early stage in this journey. It has been mixed throughout the country. There is currently 14 credit unions involved. We hope that number will grow and soon, because as Marie called, there is a real need. We're all conscious that this is a problem. We're all conscious that actually could benefit, as Colm referred to, the comfort of your home and also your bills and that. But actually doing something about it, we're slower than we should be. And I suppose that's where credit unions come in. The loan is a very straightforward process. It is for the small items, the attic insulation, up to the bigger retrofits. So Greenify has a big part to play. We're at an early part of that journey. There has been good demand. We've seen that as an early, only recently joined Mitchelstown, or some of the larger credit unions that have been involved a long time, have had a very strong lending on this. So it is mixed, but we see this as a long-term journey.
Now, a lot of people might wonder, do they need an energy report on their home to apply for the loan? So are you looking for BERs, or are you looking for improvement in BERs?
No, we're not. Now, each credit union, their loans officer, and as Colm said, every loans officer who is dealing with Greenify loans has gone on training, or that they may have their own requirements and contact your local credit union. But really, this is a straightforward loan. It's for the improvement, the energy upgrade of your home. So whatever work you're doing, if it is a smaller item with attic insulation, that we're not requiring a BER on that, no.
Okay, Mary, I'm just checking you're still with us, if you can hear me.
Yes, indeed, I am. Thank you, Helen.
Great. Mary, one thing in your presentation, you spoke about, I suppose, using energy as a weapon. So we're seeing massive impacts as a result of the war in Ukraine, the humanitarian crisis being one, the impact that's having on housing here. But I suppose the fact that now, because of energy security and because of the massive rises in energy prices, there's probably now an added impetus to address this issue. There's more reason now than ever. It's not just about the climate, which is reason enough to do it.
Yeah, yes, indeed. In fact, we have basically three crises as such. One is a crisis of price. I mean, costs have just gone through the roof in terms of, our electricity bill, petrol and diesel, oil for heating. So we have a price crisis, which is very real, and we all feel it right now. We have an imminent crisis of security of supply. We hope this won't happen, but supply of our gas mainly 60-70% of our gas comes from two pipelines coming from Scotland. If, like the Nord Stream pipe, it was ever damaged, then our supply of gas is damaged and we have no alternative source. So we have an issue with regard to electricity onshore as well, in terms of risk to blackouts over this winter and potentially next winter. So security of supply, it's an imminent risk. It's not there today, but it's hovering there. We have a longer term inevitable crisis, which is, of course, the climate crisis. And part of the difficulty is, of course, that we all know it's inevitable, but of course, it's harder to feel it today because it's going to happen progressively over the next number of years, although you can already start to feel some of the impacts. But the real opportunity out of these three crises is that the solution for all three is exactly the same. It is, we have got to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. We have got to find alternatives. The alternative means that, one, we use less energy, and this is all of the energy efficiency measures that were already mentioned, insulation so that you don't lose heat once you've heated the house. So energy efficiency measures to use less energy, and if you're going to use energy, make it sustainable. So this really is the message that we're going down the route of now. By having our own energy from our own natural resources, at least we control the price. I'm not saying it's going to be cheaper, but at least we can control it. And by having that option, we are solving, or at least taking necessary measures to solve all three crises. We can control the prices, we can have more secure supply, and we're also taking climate action against the inevitable consequences of climate change.
Great, thanks, Mary. Colm, I suppose if we talk about the things we can control and things we should control, I read recently that Irish households consume more energy than the EU average purely because the quality of our housing stock isn't up to scratch. So that's something, as well as looking at energy security and energy costs and also providing our own energy, upgrading our housing stock is vitally important, isn't it?
Yes, I suppose people don't realize how far behind we are to the European norm, but like most of our houses, over 90% of them were built before the year 2000, and anything that was built before the year 2000 effectively was built to standards that don't meet the requirements of what the Europeans would have been meeting in terms of the amount of insulation we're putting in. And at the time, we didn't see any issue with it. We just spent more money on our heating bills, or we didn't spend more money. We used more oil, but it didn't cost us very much. But I suppose we're feeling the pinch now. So it's vital that we do start the upgrade. And I know the programme for government, they have this ambition of 500,000 homes to be upgraded, but they're really pushing for a deep retrofit approach, which is quite unaffordable for a lot of people, where you have to spend maybe 50, 60, 70,000 euro. And yes, there is a grant of 25,000 euro there against that, but you're still asking homeowners to fork out maybe 30 or 40,000 on top of that to do the full deep retrofit. So, this loan scheme being offered by Greenify, I think, is fantastic because it's allowing people to do the shallow retrofit, to take small steps and improve their house. And I suppose the only bit of advice I would give is that engage an energy consultant and ask them, well, if I'm going to upgrade my attic, that I do it to the standard that would be required if I was doing a deep retrofit. So even though I'm not doing the deep retrofit, each intervention should meet the same standard. And so therefore, step by step, I could get there.
And Colm, sorry for interrupting you, but how early should you engage? Do you need to engage an energy consultant before you even take the smaller steps, or do you wait until you're going to spend a good bit of money on it? How early do you bring an energy consultant in?
I would say from the start, if you spend 500 euro on an energy consultant, or even a little bit more, in your first intervention, he could save you that amount of money by giving you proper advice. So, some people make the mistake, as I mentioned there in my presentation, that they replaced their windows, and they could spend 20,000 euro or 25,000 euro replacing their windows, but possibly there was 2 or 3 better things they could have spent their money on first before they would get to replacing their windows. Because the amount of heat that you lose to your windows is quite a small percentage compared to what you lose through your roof and your walls. And if your house is drafty, you're losing maybe 25% of your heat by drafts as well. So the windows might only account for 10% of your heat loss. So they could swallow up their whole budget doing one thing, where they could have got maybe 3 or 4 other interventions. So I really think you have to engage with that energy consultant early on. And it goes beyond the BER report, because that's just kind of advice. It only tells you what you need to do to get to this B2 standard, which is the ultimate goal. It's the holy grail. But most people can't afford to do that in one go. So we need to do it in a number of smaller steps.
A couple of technical questions are coming in for you, Colm. And again, if you have questions, keep putting them into the Q&A box and we'll get through as many of them as we can. Somebody says, I have an oil boiler which is coming to end of life. Can you please recommend the best alternative? Okay,
so I suppose each house is different. It would depend on the thermal performance of the house. If it was a house that was built, say, after 2010, possibly you could be looking at something that maybe you could be looking at a heat pump installation straight away. But if it's an older house that's maybe before 2008 or something, and you haven't done any thermal upgrades along the way already, really replacing it with another oil boiler, even though I hate to say it, is probably the best thing. Now, the reason I'm saying don't go down the heat pump route is that heat pumps work on the principle that they need to keep the house warm all day long. So that if you think of your oil boiler, you switch it on for a couple of hours in the morning, a couple of hours in the evening, but the heat pumps must be left on all the time. So if your house is poorly insulated, it means you're losing heat all the time. Your heat pump is running for a long time, it's running on electricity. So the actual running costs of a heat pump will be more expensive than the cost of running your oil boiler in an older house. Okay. Obviously, when we thermally upgrade that house, the house now holds the heat. The heat is not being lost. So leaving the heating on all day doesn't cost very much because the heat pump is only inputting a very small amount of heat constantly.
And one thing to keep in mind, Therese, if people are undertaking some of these jobs is, I suppose, they're investing in their houses as well, because we see now more than ever, the BER of a house is a big selling point, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, all of this, and we keep coming back to it, this is about future proofing. This isn't just about taking an action for now. This is about taking actions now for the long term. And absolutely, what you spend on your home to improve the energy efficiency of it, it helps immediately with your bills, but absolutely it helps the long-term value. And for all of us, our home is really our biggest spend, our biggest asset. So it's very important.
Okay, I have a question has come in.
Helen, it's
Sorry, Mary.
I'm sorry, Helen. I was just going to come in actually on that point, because it was one of the issues that the council identified as a recommendation in the annual review, was that we're all quite familiar with the price property register, and we would recommend that that register, that database, would include the BER rating of the property when it's sold, because it does change the value of the house. And I think it's a very important signal that when you go to the property register, you see what was the BER rating of the building that was sold. It's just an extra line, because in fact, to sell the house, you have to have a BER assessment in any event. So it's not any extra money, it's just an extra line of the thing. But it does give a lot of information to people and explains why sometimes on a street, one house will have a different price to another one.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Brian, if you're still here, Brian Corr from the Department of Finance, there's a question has come in about the next steps in relation to the SBCI low-cost loan package that's been developed. So what are the next steps in that, and including the timeframes? If you have any information on that, Brian?
Yeah, so on time frame, my understanding is early next year. So it was due to be this year, but I think it's now early next year based on the latest information from the Department of Energy, and they've done an invitation to pre-qualification stage. So I think that happened over the summer, and the invitation for award stage is underway. And I know there's a batch of there is some credit unions involved in that at the moment. It's probably mainly going to be the retail banks at the moment, but there is some credit unions involved in the scheme, in the development of the scheme at the moment.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Another question has come in for you, Colm. Can you give advice which is best, selling back to the grid or storing your excess energy to battery? So which would you advise? Okay,
again, very topical question. So I suppose if you sell back to the grid, you will get paid something between 14 and 16 cents per unit. So that's the rate that's being offered. At the moment, we buy electricity at peak rate now is unfortunately gone above 40 pence, 40 to 45 pence per unit. So you can see straight away, if I can keep it and use it later, it's much more valuable to me. I suppose on the flip side is a battery is expensive to buy. So you need to weigh up that, how much is it going to cost to buy the battery? And then can I actually utilize it? Now, I suppose the advantage of having a battery is that it also gives you the option in the winter time when your solar PV system mightn't be producing much energy, is that I could charge my battery using night rate electricity if I switch to one of the smart tariffs. So all the energy companies now must offer smart tariffs through this, because anyone has a smart meter, and you can buy your electricity at about 20 cents a unit, I think, at night time now. So you could charge your battery up, and then we use just annually, most people use about 4,200 units of electricity a year. So that's about maybe 12 units a day. And if you had a battery that was, say, 5 units, 5 kilowatt hours, well, you could store nearly half of the energy that you want to use during the winter time in your battery. In the summer, then you could use it to store excess energy. So I would be thinking that batteries are going to become much, much more popular, and selling back is really, you're not getting enough money for it. They want it very cheap, if you know what I mean, but they can't afford, I suppose, to pay any more. Or maybe they can.
There's another question come through for Colm, but actually I think I could put it to the entire panel. Where do we see the supply of builders coming from to complete the required deep retrofit works? Because that's a big obstacle, isn't it? The number of people who can do the work and do it properly. Do you want to address that first, Colm?
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting. The article that's in the Irish Examiner today, highlights that in terms of deep retrofits, there are only 89 full completions through that scheme. The one that the SEI launched with, the one-stop shop. There are 681 approvals so far since it was launched, and they had anticipated 500,000 comes to 62,000 a year. So that they're only at 1%, if you know what I mean, uptake. But I would think that maybe, it's been financially, it's a difficult time at the moment, and it'll take a little time to get traction. But the contractors is a massive problem. We have a huge skills shortage, and one of the issues is why we would think that doing a house as an individual is a big project for us. For a lot of the contractors, they see them as very small works. There's a small return, a small amount of profit can be made in a retrofit project, where if they're doing a new build, they can make a lot more. So how do we get all the contractors interested? Because there is quite a lot of work. It's slow work. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff that they're not sure until they start stripping out walls and ceilings what actually is going to entail. And it can be very difficult for them to give a final price, because they don't know what, maybe when they take up a floor, all the timbers are already rotten. You see it on grand designs all the time. When we tear down walls, you find horrid stories behind it. So there's not enough contractors there. I think, the education and training boards are really trying to get more and more tradespeople in. The ETBs, and it's been led by the Waterford and Wexford ETB, are now running NZEB training courses for all sorts of professionals. It could be tradespeople, it could be plumbers, it could be carpenters, electricians in NZEB, which is nearly zero energy buildings, and they have a course for retrofitting of buildings as well. Now that's going to be rolled out across the country. I think it's going to be delivered in 5 different training sessions across the country at the moment. I think it's up and running in 1 other training session apart from Waterford Wexford at the moment. So that will encourage current tradespeople to come in and retrain to see how they upgrade buildings to this nearly zero energy buildings. So hopefully we will see an uptake in more tradespeople.
Trace, it's something that Brian Corr suggested. I'll come back to you, Mary, in 1 sec. I'm just going to put one quick question, Trace, and I'll come to you. But Brian Corr suggested in his presentation, Trace, that maybe the credit unions could do something to support apprenticeships. Is that something you think might be possible?
Absolutely. I suppose the credit unions, in the earlier address, we don't see our role as simply producing a loan product and selling it. We do see our role as being an active part of our community to support it, and Greenify is the perfect example of that. And Marie mentioned earlier, Mary, about that people need to see it working and community initiatives of that. And I thought, great idea, that's somewhere that credit unions could fit in. So if that's there, if it's in apprenticeships or that, in whatever way we can help support communities, credit unions absolutely will step up to that mark.
Sorry, Mary, you wanted to come in there, the availability of the people to do the jobs.
Well, in fact, it's just building, in fact, on this whole issue of the community, because, Colm's right to say that it's a small job for a contractor. But if, for example, there were, say, 4 or 5 houses in a row, be they detached, semi-detached, all of whom were going to do something, let's say attic or whatever it might be, then you suddenly go from a small project to a larger project. It's much more cost effective for the contractor because he can move in his equipment, do all 5 houses and then move out again. Just think about the efficiencies of trying to get, a bulk purchase basically of some of these measures. And that's where community support can be hugely important, where the community could maybe put together 3, 4, 5 more if possible houses be dealt with at the same time and get efficiencies. It'll reduce the cost for the individuals, but it'll also make it much more attractive for the contractor and get a better return for the scarce human resources that we actually have. There are examples. Sorry, there are examples of that in other countries where they have special measures to bring in a community retrofit program as well as individual ones to get this economy of scale going.
Okay, well, I have you there, Mary, and we have a lot of attendees from political parties actually on this call. So what do you think, what else would you like our politicians to do to help support homeowners in upgrading their homes? What more could politicians be doing?
Well, I think the first issue is, and this is not to be hostile or negative or anything like that, but I think we do have a very good suite of grant systems in place, you know, through SAAI and whatever. I think there is a consideration that should be taken into account, however, in that for the most part, when you're going for a grant, you have to fund the activity first and then get the grant back afterwards. And that means you need to have the disposable income available to you to fund it, and then wait for, you know, 1 month or 2 months or 3 months, the case may be, to get the funding back. And that might be a disincentive for some people to take the measures that are available and that really they could be taking. So I think one way of looking at how the funding is actually made available, I just take, you know, and Colm, I take the point about attic insulation and how it needs to be done properly, and you have to be careful of the water tank, and you must make sure you don't puncture any wires. But you know, if you could buy it in the local store and get the reduction at point of purchase, it might make it more attractive and more feasible for some people for whom disposable income is really very scarce. So I think looking at the efficiency of the distribution mechanism of the money that has been allocated in this space is one of the areas that politicians could perhaps take greater initiatives on. Okay.
Okay, we have actually a nice message here from Maria. Not a question, but a thank you from someone who's had a Greenify loan. We borrowed the full amount, did a full retrofit to our home, and we're delighted with how warm and easy to heat our home is. So that's a nice message to get. And I suppose sticking with the kind of how optimistic or pessimistic we are, for the panel, somebody has asked, how do you feel about Ireland's ability to deliver on our shared climate changes responsibilities in the future? And I come to you first, Mary. I mean, you mentioned the fact that it's not just the built environment, there's industry, there's agriculture, there's a lot of different sectors have to meet targets. The next one by 2030. How optimistic are you?
Well, I am by nature an optimist. It's the first thing. And I think it's, you know, one has to acknowledge that through the legislation, both houses of the Oireachtas have adopted legislation that has set a target for Ireland for 2030 that is the second highest in the world. So our ambition is really out there. Our challenge, of course, is now to deliver on that. It means that we all have to accept that there will be changes. The key issue for me is that we need to ensure that the changes we make our lives better. You know, it's not just about don't do this or don't do that or don't do the other. It's about how can we have a very comfortable, successful living environment, a successful economy, by being sustainable. So I think part of the challenge that we're facing now is the communication message as to one, why are we doing this? What are the positives in it? And how do we achieve it? And in that way, then, we do need everybody to support the changes and the adaptation that we're going to have to do. And on that basis, I do believe we will achieve it.
Okay, and our other panelists, Colm or Therese, how optimistic are you that we can achieve our targets?
I'd like to think we can, but I mean, we have set very, very ambitious targets. But yes, I think all sectors are working independently, and hopefully, if we can deliver, I mean, I'm working in the built environment. Like even the transport sector is a big challenge. Again, it was on the radio. I think, are we up to 16% of our new vehicles now are electric vehicles? But the problem is that people who find it hard to buy a new electric vehicle. It's expensive, but there's no second-hand electric vehicles on the road. If we had a whole fleet of second-hand ones that people could kind of get their foot into the market. So the transport sector is going to be a challenge, and the transport sector is also a challenge in the commercial vehicles, because it's very difficult for them to become electrified. So we need to look at other fuel sources, maybe like hydrogen and so on. But yeah, I think we will be severely challenged. But there are very good examples in other countries in Europe that are ahead of us, and I think we look at those. I think we can learn from them. Countries like Denmark that are really striving and are quite ambitious. And I think it needs a lot of investment, and people need to be supported.
And Therese?
Yeah, I suppose clearly it's ambitious. There's no question of that when you see the figures yesterday compared to the targets. But in terms of, Colm had mentioned the word there, working independently. Brian earlier mentioned that credit unions are fragmented, that's one of the things that come against it. So I suppose from a credit union perspective, where we see the role of Greenify as being so important, is that this is actually credit unions collaborating to be part of the answer to Ireland's problem, a crisis of climate change. And we've seen that work so well. And Brian mentioned that earlier with Cultivate. Collaborative finance behind Cultivate are again behind Greenify. So we really feel that the joined up forces of credit unions through Greenify is how we can play a big part in that working forward.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of today's speakers, Therese Conway, Mary Donnelly, Colm Tynan and Brian Corr. Thank you all for taking the time as well to take part in the webinar. If you would like to find out more about Greenify, you can visit greenify.ie. There's lots of information there. So thank you all for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.